AI is going to have obviously a massive impact on our world. And the question was, okay, is that going to be purely in the digital world or is it going to be also in the physical world? These didn't feel like they're going to be automated anytime soon by AI. Number three was food. And so it kind of made sense that that's actually the biggest kind of tractable or doable market that AI could actually focus on. So it's kind of very much a practical decision about how big is the market. Now, further from that, I talked to a lot of people in the food industry, and what I learned is that there is this massive gap in the market around labor shortage. It's actually the number one labor shortage in the entire US. And the traditional pieces of automation, dispensers, depositors, don't work well enough to solve this problem, which is why all these companies are having to use humans, but of course there's not enough humans. So, it felt like there's a need in the market for something flexible that can leverage kind of these modern techniques in AI to create the human equivalent workstation, if you will, to help these food companies overcome the labor shortage and thereby increase production volume.
Like what inspired you to start Chef Robotics in the first place, right? Right after your schooling or your master's, you saw something, some need in the food industry that robotics can uniquely solve. So I just wanted to start up with that, right? What inspired you in the first place?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that I was kind of thinking about was that AI is going to have obviously a massive impact on our world. And the question was, okay, is that going to be purely in the digital world or is it going to be also in the physical world? And my kind of simple thinking was like 90% of GDP is in the physical world. And therefore, like it made sense to think about how AI will be applied there. Now, why food? Honestly, that was more of a practical decision than anything. I went to the Bureau for Labor Statistics and I said, okay, what are the biggest industries by labor force size? And what I basically learned is that the biggest industry is retail salespeople and nursing and personal care aides, at least in the US. These didn't feel like they're going to be automated anytime soon by AI. Number three was food. And so it kind of made sense that that's actually the biggest kind of tractable or doable market that AI could actually focus on. So it's kind of very much a practical decision about how big is the market. Now, further from that, I talked to a lot of people in the food industry, and what I learned is that there is this massive gap in the market around labor shortage. It's actually the number one labor shortage in the entire US. And the traditional pieces of automation, dispensers, depositors, don't work well enough to solve this problem, which is why all these companies are having to use humans, but of course there's not enough humans. So, it felt like there's a need in the market for something flexible that can leverage kind of these modern techniques in AI to create the human equivalent workstation, if you will, to help these food companies overcome the labor shortage and thereby increase production volume. But again, it was very practical, I would say. It was kind of really looking at the markets and like, what are the biggest possible ones? I mean, I considered construction even, and agriculture and software and cars and a bunch of other things. And I realized that really this felt like the best market I could focus on.
Good. No, I can understand software much better than hardware, where kind of really challenging to just look at it. Even the first robot to get installed in a food assembly place to make it work. And I don't think you came from a food industry, even though you tried to learn it, right?
Yeah.
So kind of the first one or two, maybe you have to do a POC pilot, right? I mean, what are the challenges you faced and how did you overcome it?
Yeah. No, it's a really good question. And I think it's actually, I mean, building something customers don't want is the reason almost all startups fail, but especially kind of hardware and robotics startups. And the simple reason for this is, for a software as a service company, you might have 10 shots on goal, let's say, with a pre-seed round to build something that users want. With a robotics company, I mean, it may take 3 months, 6 months to build even one unit, right? One prototype. And so you might only have 1 or 2 shots on goal before you run out of money, right? So it's really important to almost not beat around the bush and just jump to the right product if you could. And the way we thought about this is a couple things. One is we tried to sell the product before building it. And this is a little bit different than, the general methodology that people talk about in Silicon Valley, right? The lean startup is the more common approach. The lean startup is this idea of, let me build a prototype, let me take it to customers, let me get user feedback, and let me iterate. And again, that works great for SaaS and consumer software because you can build a prototype in a weekend. But that doesn't work so well for robotics because, again, it takes 3-6 months to iterate, and you're going to run out of money if you try to do that approach. So by selling the product, we got real contracts from our customers. And we kind of knew that they wanted it. I mean, they're signing a contract. Now, again, we reduce risk for the customer in the contract by saying, hey, look, you don't have to pay the robotics as a service fee. Our business model is robotics as a service until the robots meet some kind of predefined site acceptance test. So this kind of allowed us to have a real contract, but allowed the customer to feel good that they're not signing up for something that's technically not going to work. And we're taking on, of course, the technical risk. So that was one general thing we try to do. By the way, a natural extension of this is we also get the product requirements, right? So not only do we get a sales contract, but we get product requirements across a few different customers that we can synthesize into one PRD. That's one broad strokes thing we try to do to kind of really understand the customers, learn their requirements, make sure we build the right thing. The other big thing we tried to do is really embed ourselves with our customers. I mean, literally, like we were at our customer sites every single day, right? Amy's Kitchen was one of our first customers, and literally every single day we were there testing our robots with their ingredients on their lines and their lighting conditions with their users running it, right? And this is, again, pre-production. This is before like these meals would actually go on to make revenue for our first customers, more just testing. But what happened with this is the customer would be like, hey, this placement quality isn't good, or hey, there's a bug right there, whatever happened and your robot's not performing well, and we can quickly fix it. Or hey, like, there's too much spillage right here. Or, we notice things like, oh, our ingredient is changing day by day. The rice from yesterday is not the same as the rice today. It's cooked a little bit differently. Or even things like food safety. Like we hadn't dealt with food safety, our team, right? We were a team of like good engineers, but we weren't food safety experts, right? But now the customer is like, hey, you got to do this and this and this and this, and now we can do it on the product. Or human safety, like, hey, there's a pinch point in your end effector, and that's going to be potentially a safety hazard. Hey, you need to work on this. So really, we learned immensely from our early customers. We really learned the food industry backwards and forwards from these early customers, and I think that's a generally helpful thing to do for any company, but especially a company in the physical world.
Cool. Hey, Rajat, see, Chef Robotics brings together, robotics, AI, and brings it for the food assembly place, and the food ingredients are all of different shapes and sizes, right? And the menus themselves, probably there'll be multiple menus, and the menus can change almost every day. So, just curious how the chef robots, learn, right, about each ingredient menu, and it's not like a fixed function robot, right? So it's kind of more complicated and more intelligent. So
yeah. So and I think that's exactly right. I mean, there is actually a lot of traditional automation, but George, as you said, it tends to be fixed. It is very good at doing the same thing over and over again. I mean, you probably have seen these robots in car factories, right? They can take the exact same door and put it in the exact same place. But if the door is a little bit different, then the robot will fail. Or if the car is in a slightly different place, the robot will fail. The food industry has kind of two things that are inherent with it that make these traditional pieces of automation not work. One is, of course, any given ingredient. Just pick an ingredient, diced chicken. Every single ingredient in and of itself changes day by day. Obviously, that particular ingredient is organic. All food is organic, but there's an inherent kind of variance that comes literally hour by hour, batch by batch, day by day. So that's just within an ingredient. Now, of course, there's thousands and thousands of ingredient classes, right? And because of all this, you really need to leverage artificial intelligence to make sense of it and do something different every single time. So what do? Well, we have a RGB D camera, D as in depth, that's pointing at our ingredients. And that's useful to understand not only the topography, but also things like, hey, what ingredient kind is it, for example. And then what we can do is we have different policies, AI policies, on how do we manipulate that different ingredient differently. So as an example, if I'm picking up blueberries, I probably need to apply less pressure for my end effector, so I'm going to squish the blueberries. Or perhaps for something like mashed potato, there's big hills and valleys. So if I pick in a valley, well, I'm not going to get the right amount. I'm not going to get the right consistency, right? So essentially, we have a model that is predicting the pose that the robot should pick at. Pose basically means the XYZ point as well as the orientation of the end effector in space. So both of those things are kind of the output of the model, and that really allows us to say, okay, well, where should the robot arm go to before it actuates? And then there's a bunch of different parameters for how the end effector should actually actuate. Both these things come together and allows us to really pick the ingredient consistently at the right portion size without crushing it, without spilling it. Similarly, on the placement side, then, we have some computer vision models that are detecting and tracking the trays. And this allows us to do things like, okay, well, hey, there's the tray is rotated a little bit. Okay, well, let's still be able to place in a way that's aesthetically clean. Or hey, the tray is a little bit farther away from the conveyor. Let's still make it be able to place. Or maybe the conveyor is a little bit bumped, et cetera, et cetera. There's all these edge cases you see. And these AI models really allow you to make sense of that and dynamically react as opposed to just doing the same thing over and over again.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rajat, right? Using robots in the food assembly is relatively new, right? I don't think it's something that has been there like in the automobile or electronics manufacturing. This is more sophisticated, right? So you would have faced some interesting, what I call, challenges with respect to how people, it's always easy to say, I don't know whether robots will work in the food assembly, and there's like the psychological or perceptual challenges, right? Or misconceptions. Did you face any of those trying to convince customers in the initial stages, right? Hey, this won't work,
Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, 100%, right? Like, we would talk to customers, and frankly, they didn't even know this was remotely possible, right? Like, they're used to like a big hopper, a dispenser, basically, where there's some kind of electronic mechanism that like extrudes the food out, for example. I mean, it's very mechanical or very hardware oriented, right? So this idea of like a software system that is going to make food is just weird. It's a weird idea, right? So what did we do about it? Well, I think the first thing was really having really great marquee customers from day one. So for us, that was Amy's Kitchen and Sunbasket. These are both brands that people know about. We deeply partner with these companies. It wasn't a customer vendor relationship. I mean, like, we were talking to them every single day. We were at their plant every single day. So I think that we garnered a lot of trust, and by extension, by the way, these customers also expanded substantially. So like, it was a great relationship just for us and the customer, but also like, they were willing to write case studies with us, and those case studies were godsend because now we could take those case studies to the next customer and say, hey, look, we understand you're a little bit skeptical. We understand that you're not convinced that this is technically going to work, but here's some other partner who's also skeptical, and here's how well it worked for them. That was one thing that was really effective. Another thing that's really effective is how, again, you structure the contract. So the way we kind of structured our contracts is, look, we do need some kind of non-recurring expense fee. We call these like NREs to just start the business relationship, because we need to know that you're serious, and we do require that you pay that at contract signature, but that's not a huge sum of money. It should be something that's very tenable for you. The way and really a customer, that's just to cover our costs. That's because we're going to be flying out or driving out, getting hotels near your plant to deploy the robots. It's just to cover our costs. We're not trying to make money on that. And then of course there's a robotics as a service fee. And customer, that's how we really make money. But we're not going to ask you to pay for this unless we meet, again, some predefined site acceptance test criteria. And again, those aren't criteria that we set. Those are criteria that we set together. So all the things you might care about, whether that's throughput or consistency or placement accuracy or food safety, let's put those into a test and issue a black and white test if we meet it or not. What this essentially allows you customers, like some reassurance that you're not going to be stuck with a robot that just doesn't work. We don't want to pay. We don't want to make you pay for something that is simply not going to work. And this really allows you to reduce risk. That I think was very effective. That approach, that contractual approach, was very effective. And the final thing I'll just say is, like, there's nothing like seeing it to believe it, right? So in the early days, we would ask customers that, hey, why don't you send us your ingredients? Why don't you come by our office? we'll create a little demo for you using your ingredients, using your trays. We set up a little mock assembly line, and we show them the robots working, and we walk them through here's how you here's how you use the robots, here's how you sanitize the robots, here's how you change over the robots to go from one meal to the other, here's how you onboard a new ingredient, here's literally your ingredients running. And they would play with it, right? They'd be like, what if the trays rotated, or what if etc. If there's no tray at all, does the robot just place it on the conveyor? Like, and that really built a lot of trust for the customers too, that hey, this isn't just like some gimmick. Like I'm doing, like, this is exactly my assembly line, and I see it work.
Based on the customers you have today, the deployments that you have today, I'm just kind of curious to know, how do you think robots are going to shape the food assembly industry for the next 3 to 5 years, right? Like looking at the overall efficiency, the overall quality. It's not just human replacement, right? It's also more than that. So I'm trying to share what your experience has been with respect to, maybe you'll have enough data by now to show that, right? So just curious as to how the robots are changing just beyond being a human replacement.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think it actually goes to even something simpler and more fundamental than even a human replacement. And it kind of comes back to that point I made a little bit earlier, which is there's a huge labor shortage. And I actually have a kind of a nice anecdote to highlight this. So we were actually at a customer in Ohio, maybe 2 months ago, and we got an Uber to go to the customer site from the hotel. And we just started chatting with the Uber driver, and we're like, oh, we're going to this customer. And she's like, oh, I used to work there. And then we were like, like weird coincidence, right? But then she went on to say that this customer had literally hired everyone within a 50-mile radius. Not literally everyone, but essentially everyone of like able-bodied ability within a 50-mile radius. There's nobody else to do the job. So I say this because, I mean, it is quite a hard job, right? I mean, physically, right? Just to kind of highlight this, it's almost all of our customers are cold rooms. So it's either 34 degree Fahrenheit, 1 degree Celsius or something, very cold. You're doing these redundant motions all day long. So I think the simple reality is we talk to a lot of our customers, and they're like, look, if we do not solve this problem in, let's say, 5 to 10 years, we will not be able to hire people to do this job, full stop, period. Like, it is an existential threat to this business. If we do not solve this, we can't survive. We need to automate. And it's strategic, is what I mean to say. It's not trying to replace anybody. It's just like, hey, I don't have enough people. So that's why that's like, the vision of the future is really, yes, like there's no vision of the future where you're going to have thousands of humans come to a plant every day assembling food. That's just not going to happen. Now the question is, who does it, right? And of course, we hope to be the ones that make that possible. Now I kind of going more to a practical ROI basis. The biggest ROI again is, hey, previously line 10 over there can't run because they don't have people. Now line 10 can run. That's the biggest ROI. That's millions of dollars of revenue for these folks. The second biggest ROI is, yes, it's cheaper than labor, right? On a year-by-year basis, we have a robotics as a service fee. That robotics as a service fee is going to be less than the cost of status quo labor. Okay, so it's cheaper. 3 is that we basically unanimously can help with consistency and food waste. So I think what's important to remember is that around 50% of revenue for these food companies goes to food, raw material. Well, humans tend to overdeposit. As a general statement, humans tend to overdeposit. And we can talk about why that is, but it's just a general kind of truth in the food industry. The result of this is, of course, overspend on that number, that 50% of your revenue. If we can help bring down that food waste, I mean, it's a huge, huge ROI for our customers. The final thing I'll just say is almost always we can help with increasing average throughput. The way to think about this is that we are a lot more faster throughout the shift. Humans can have big spikes. They can come into work feeling very excited and like, hey, we're going to have a great day at work. But 5 hours into the shift, I mean, they're tired. So their average throughput goes down. Whereas Chef is kind of like a metronome, and therefore we can actually increase average throughput. So I highlight those ROI points, but really, honestly, that it comes down to the vision in the future. There's no vision in the future without robots or of some kind, and hopefully ours, that are doing this work.
Hey, interesting. Just curious question. Now, as the food assembly, your customers learn how the robots can really, kind of help in multiple ways, not just replacing labor, but also in efficiency, in quality, and all that stuff that you mentioned. Just curious, as they learn more about chef robots in the assembly, right? Do you see opportunities where they will look at changing some of the workflows? That the workflows are usually driven based on the past, which is mostly humans,
Yeah.
right? With
Yeah.
robots, do you think, or do you foresee that they will make changes to the workflows to even drive more efficiencies and throughput, things like that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and many dimensions of the whole operation, right? And we could talk about this for a while, honestly. So I'll give some examples. One example is there's certain ingredient deposits that are limited by the size of the human hand. Literally, like you have to have one person doing the onion deposit, one person doing the sweet potato deposit, because literally the sweet potato deposit doesn't, plus onion doesn't fit into the human hand. Okay, so now you need two separate humans doing that job. Okay, well, chef, you can just have a bigger end effector. And now you've just reduced, you've saved cost for chef, and you've literally halved your humans for that line. Not half, but you lose one station of headcount, right? Which is great. So that's a very simple example. Another example might be, for humans, of course, you need to take lunch breaks, and they usually take breaks every hour, 2 hours, right, just to stretch and relax a little bit. With chef, you can imagine having a essentially robot only or mostly robot line, 6 robots, 4 robots, 8 robots type of thing. And you can just run continuously. Take your 1 or 2 SKUs, products that are super high volume products, and just run all day long, high output. You don't need to take lunch breaks. You don't need to take breaks. And perhaps even if there's humans on the line, because there's still often humans, robots and humans working together, you can kind of have like a cycling system as opposed to like stopping the line. So, if you look at the output, by time, our customers are very just flat. It's not like, whereas historically it was like down because of breaks, down because of breaks, down. Now it's just flat, right? Which is really cool to see. I mean, there's many examples like this, but I think like that's one thing that's very, I think, special about Chef as a general statement, that it's kind of like infrastructure for them. We very much like embed ourselves into the customer. And again, it's a partnership too, right? Like we're having calls with them every week, oftentimes multiple times a week, even after the deployment. And so, we're here to support them, like if they want to do deeper integration changes to allow for this.
So currently, Rajat, is it mostly a direct, what I call, engagement with the customer, in the sense, not of course, but I'm talking more about how you would scale as you try to win more brands, right? That do food assembly. So is it still your strategy to do it directly, or you're going to use partners to scale more than beyond the US, or even within the US, a kind of what is your scaling strategy?
Yep, great question. So at least the time being, I think we're very focused on direct, mainly because each of our customers at scale is a pretty big opportunity, right? It's not like these customers are going to get 2 robots, 4 robots, 10 robots. Usually these customers, even the smallest customers, have opportunity for 50 plus robots. The biggest customers, 500 plus robots. So, we simply know that we will provide the best success and service to be able to get and capture that opportunity. It's really not about the initial robots. It's really about the expansion, right? Is the way we think about this. Even if a customer starts with, let's say, a starter pack, we call them starter packs, a starter pack of 4 robots. Great, we got into the door. But really what we're trying to do is get them to scale at 50 robots, right? So I think our thinking is like, we need to manage that partnership really well. With that being said, what we are doing is developing partnerships with each of the big players that are adjacent players, right? So for example, conveyors. Anytime you need chef robots, you need conveyors, and vice versa. Anytime you need robots, anytime you have conveyors, you need anytime you have robots, you need conveyors, and conveyors, you need robots, right? So, um, can we partner with these folks, and can we share leads? Can we do marketing together, for example? Can we set up referral programs? Maybe they're not actually doing the deployment, right? But maybe they can at least act as a top of funnel source for leads, for example. So that is something that I think we're actively working on. Is there a future down the line, especially as we expand internationally, where we do partners? I think yes, especially in Asian countries where, like, obviously there's many case studies of people who have tried to go international and failed, for example, in China or Japan, without having a local partner. So I think certainly in those cases, but I think for, I think the US, Canada, North America, and then probably Europe, I think we'd like to do as much of it as we can for the time being.
Just a technology question, right? In the next 12 to 24 months, from a chef roadmap point of view, what is one or two exciting developments? Because you are at the intersection of two, what I call bleeding edge fields, right? AI and robotics, right? What are the, like, one or two, if you can share? If you don't want to share, that's okay. That excites you about, right? From like a jump in your what you're going to bring to the industry.
Yeah. I do think, like, I'll say just a couple of things. One is, I do think these foundation models and transformers are powering a lot of powerful models in robotics. Transformers are the backbone of LLMs and VLMs, for example, like GPT. That's really powerful. But transformers can also be used to power things like what's called diffusion policy, which is powering imitation learning and learning from demonstration. This is what's, for example, allowing Tesla FSD V12 to be as good as it is today, which is a big step change. And it's basically trained on human drivers. Like, they take the top sampling of 50, 100 human drivers. Maybe it's more than this, but you get the idea, like the top sampling of some drivers, and kind of train their vehicles on that. And you can imagine Chef doing some approach similar to that, which is, let's have a human demonstrate a motion, and then Chef can very quickly kind of just mimic that motion. Obviously not exactly, but using its own models as well, to be able to kind of do interesting tasks without having to write code against it. And I think that's a really exciting development that we're working on and tracking, of course, very closely as well in the industry for the new papers and research. The other one, just that's kind of more intrinsic to Chef, just for our customers, is, to date, Chef has been very focused on what we call scoopable food, right? Most food is scoopable, 70 to 80% of it's scoopable. But there's certain ingredients you can imagine that are more piece-picked. Perhaps you want one chicken breast or salmon fillet, or you want one cherry tomato, or anything like this, right? It's more about a count, and I think we're starting some work on that, and that's really powered by all the modern advancements we've seen in the hardware technology, for example, end effector developments for suction in a food safe way, and then also, of course, the AI methods to be able to detect these and segment these ingredients robustly, right? Deep learning, of course, came out almost a decade ago. It really became kind of production grade, maybe I say, a decade ago, with AlexNet and things like the ImageNet and all these different things. But I think now segmentation is also becoming really good, right? And I think we're really excited about these technologies. For example, Facebook segment anything is a good, like, kind of example of this, right? And I think we're quite excited about, can we use these new techniques and models to be able to have really robust perception systems to be able to detect, for example, in the produce industry or the bakery industry, or of course within the meals industry, single piece picked items, for example.
Curious, I know your initial focus, or even your primary focus rather, has been in food assembly kitchens, and I was fortunate to visit two of them, thanks to you. That was kind of an enlightening experience for me. Is what's kind of the growth plans, right? I mean, when you see Chef Robotics going beyond the traditional, if I'm mostly frozen food, right? That we get it in different malls. It's like a tray and things like that. But there are lot of food assembly, kind of adjacent markets like airlines, uh, right, which traditionally serve food on trays, and also kitchens and things like that. So, kind of as you become more and more confident in this primary focus area, right? How do you see your growth expanding, right? So both
Yeah,
in the
for sure.
existing segment as well as entering new segments.
Yep, for sure. And there's a ton of opportunity. I mean, this is what's kind of, it's quite a bit. So, I mean, right now, I think one way to think about this is kind of we're in a few different industries at this moment, right? So, we do frozen prepared meals, we do more fresh prepared meals, we do kind of direct to consumer, and then we do contract manufacturing for meals. These are all kind of in a large scale, more what you would consider industrial kitchen, right? Now, of course, there's a ton of opportunity. Just let's just say nothing else happens. There's a ton of opportunity just here. These customers tend to have many plants. I mean, for example, one of our customers has 13 different plants all over the US. So, being able to scale within those customers is a giant industry in and of itself. Now, moreover, the more things we can do within those current customers, the more robots we can deploy just within those current customers. Just to give you some examples, I mentioned piece-picked items. If we can, for example, pick up salad dressing cups or croton packets or forks, well, that's another couple of robots we can deploy in every single one of the production lines we are on. Or if we can do fruits, okay, that's another production line. Okay, let's do fruit assembly. You want to pick up some diced apples or things like this, right? So anyways, I think it's like that's kind of step one, which is this continue expanding depthfully, breadthfully, and also kind of for new ingredient classes within our current customers. Then there's like, okay, well, now let's take that overseas, right? So now let's kind of go international. And I think that's, of course, a big market into itself. Then there's a lot of adjacent markets still within industrial. So like just, again, I mentioned a few, I alluded to a few, so I would say earlier, produce is a really big one, right? It's a giant industry, and they need bin picked solutions. They still have people kind of, counting the number of pears to put in a box. You can imagine chef robots doing that, right? Meat packing is another really big one, of course, right? Tyson and Smithfield and those kind of companies. Again, thousands and tens of thousands of humans at those plants. Bakeries, not kind of the bakery down the street, but more like food processing, food manufacturing bakeries. So I think there's a lot of adjacent markets that our current technology and current robot cells are going to be able to. George, you mentioned airline catering. I think that's a really good example as well. Pet foods. There's many cases. I mean, we could just be doing more industrial stuff and still be a gigantic company. Now let's take that one step further. Let's say we now go to lower volume, right? Let's say we try to go from more manufacturing to service. Ghost kitchens become really popular and exciting. Fast casuals, especially the fast casuals that are doing big volumes of delivery orders, they tend to have a back of house line just for delivery. School meals, right? Hospital meals is another really big industry for us, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you can imagine like music venues and sports venues and cruises and stadiums. I mean, commercial kitchens are literally everywhere. So I think right now we're just maniacally focused on industrial kitchens because we think that's a really big opportunity. But the reason I started this company, again, back to the initial point I made, is market size. I mean, food is one of the biggest markets on planet Earth. I think a lot of Silicon Valley investors don't appreciate this because they're so focused on software. But if you just get out of software, the physical world is orders of magnitude bigger than software.
Physical AI is huge. It's just this is a good example, right, of how physical AI is going to grow, right? Not just AI from a software point of view, right?
And by the way, each of these industries is like a $10 billion company potentially. Like it might seem small, but the pet food industry, that industry is huge. Just that one industry. Bakeries and produce is huge. I mean, any one of these is a gigantic company. And again, take their market cap or take their revenue. Let's just say, take a company like Dole Foods. A third of that's going to labor. That's the market size of, let's say, Chef, fully formed. Of course, that's not totally realistic because we can't do everything, and there's some qualifiers there. But I guess it's a thought experiment. It kind of gets you directionally the point that labor is literally the biggest market on planet Earth at $45 trillion in GDP, and food is one of the biggest parts of the labor market.
Kind of shifting from products, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Raja. This is your first startup after your graduation. I think so. I hope I'm not wrong.
I did a startup
Uh,
in college, but of course this was kind of during college. It wasn't the same as yeah.
True. Now you built a very, kind of impressive company, and the proof is in the pudding, right? Your robots are being used in real work, to environments, and customers are, kind of very happy with the product, and it's just the growth path is just amazing. That's in front of you, right? Just curious, as you started this company, you obviously built the team. You have to build robots, which is hardware. Software is easier than building hardware and software, um, and assembly and things like that, deploying. Kind of trying to understand what are the from a leadership point of view, because you are leading the company as CEO and founder. What are the challenges you faced, or what did you learn along the way, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. And of course, I made many mistakes, all the mistakes in the book you can make. I think the reason I think I've been able to kind of do this is a few things. One is I think I try to be very low ego, and if I don't know something, I'm very willing to just ask, right? And so I have a ton of different kind of advisors, right? So like what I tried to do in the early days is like each discipline, I tried to get somebody I really admire as an advisor. So whether that's engineering or engineering management or product management or enterprise sales or hiring, in each discipline, I try to find somebody who I admire, and then I would meet with them pretty regularly. And then on top of that, of course, I have just core mentors, people who just like a couple, like for example, the founder of Indiegogo is one of my core mentors, and I've known him for like at this point like almost a decade, and a great personal relationship, and he's just a great person I can always turn to. Beyond that, of course, I try to really invest in things like a leadership coach, and then also, of course, like lots of founder friends. And so, anyways, I guess what I'm trying to say is like I try to immerse myself in the community and people around me, like they can kind of teach me and learn. And then, of course, my job is to be humble enough to say I don't know and ask questions, right? So that's like one broad strokes thing. The other thing I think there is something to be said about like a lot of times people have this kind of perception that you need like decades of experience to build a successful thing. And of course, there's some truth to that. It makes sense, right? You might believe that. But I think there's enough counterexamples where, relatively young people, whether it's like the Carlson brothers or Zuckerberg, of course, and there's so many others, even Elon, have been extremely successful. And I think it just comes down to like, yeah, insatiable curiosity and just like really trying to like learn as much as you possibly can. And like a lot of times, like the decisions to make are apparent. I mean, they're kind of obvious, like what you should do. It's just about having the courage to like execute and take risks. I think like that is hard. Emotionally, that's hard. But like the decision is kind of obvious, right? Like, hey, I need to do this. Like, I need to increase sales, or I need to get fundraising and done. And how do I do that? I mean, that's a hard process, but there's no like secrets. It's just you got to do the work.
Just following up on that, right? I mean, wearing my avatar hat, which kind of, we look at a lot of these portfolio companies, but also investment opportunities, a lot of startups, fundraising, like Chef. That's how we got to be partners, right? What are the one or two? Because Chef Robotics is disrupting the food assembly industry, right? And there are many startup founders who are trying to disrupt in their own way. If you have to give one or two, pieces of advice, what it will be?
This is just around fundraising, or generally just company?
No, generally, not fundraising. Just like you're doing a startup that's going to disrupt something, like what Chef is doing. What is the one or two pieces of advice you want to give this is more for founders, CEOs, right?
Yep. I mean, I think we talked a little bit about the selling before building. I think that's really helpful. So like I would just emphasize that. I think we already talked about it, so I'm not going to talk about it more. But I think that's a generally helpful point. You get contracts, you get product requirements. Again, the number one reason startups fail is they build something nobody wants. By selling before building, you know somebody wants it. They signed a contract with you, right? Now you got to figure out how to execute on the thing you promised them, but they've told you what you want. They want it. The other big thing I'll say is just like an immense focus on hiring. There's a lot of advice I think I hear a lot about, which is like, okay, hire your friends. And I think, by the way, there's some truth to that, right? I mean, like, you're probably friends with a lot of smart people, right? That's why they're your friends, especially if you're doing a founder, if you're a founder. And they're probably willing to work really hard. And, like, there's a lot of benefits in this. But if you're, let's say, right out of school, like, you're not going to have very senior friends, is the reality. You're not, and so I think that is a good strategy, hire your friends, if you're doing some kind of company that's not technically crazy intense, like, again, software as a service, consumer software. Like, these are hard companies and businesses to build. No exception. These are very hard businesses, but they're not technically super hard businesses. If you're doing something with robotics and deep AI, not like taking GPT as an API call, but actually building AI models and things like that, like rockets, radar, these like deep tech things. I do think putting an immense focus on hiring very senior staff level engineers is very helpful. And of course it's hard, because of course you can't pay them what Google is paying them or whatever is paying them, right? And so, in the early days I was spending literally 100% of my time. Then of course now it's more like 20-30% of my time, but a fairly high percentage of my time just trying to get these people. And really I treat them like investors. I mean, they're investing with their time, which, by the way, in my opinion is even more, well, it's non-renewable, right? It's a lot harder to come by time, right? So they only have one bet, right? So I basically treat these folks like investors, and it's like, here's why you should take a bet on me, first of all, and the company, right? Because we can't pay you the same amount of money, but we can pay you in equity, and here's why you should take that bet. A lot of people can't do it, right? They have partners and kids and mortgages, and for example, we're in San Francisco. They can't commute from San Jose. There's 20 reasons why somebody couldn't do it. So you talk to a lot of people. Of course, the volume of people you need to talk to is high, but it's well worth the investment, because I'm not exaggerating. Like, 1 or 2 really good engineers can do the work of like 7-8 engineers if they're, and that's not untrue, right? So I think really trying to get not necessarily the volume of engineers, but like 1 or 2 just world-class engineers pays volumes. They'll set the right architecture decisions, right? Like, architecture is very sticky. You pick the wrong thing, and it persists. I mean, Facebook is still kind of using a version of PHP, a modified version of PHP, decades in. Well, why? Because they started that way. So I think these early decisions from the engineering perspective have big consequences. If you do the wrong thing, it is hard to undo that. So I would just say, like, really invest in hiring. Now, to be clear, that's assuming you have some modicum of product market fit. So like, it's not like if you don't have product market fit and you're trying to spend an immense amount of time, you could, but again, as the job of the founder is to do that, right? To get product market fit. And then once you're starting to scale, like, the best predictor of success is, I think, one of the best predictors of success is quality of team. With the right team, you can do basically anything.
Yeah, fully agree. Few good hires or employees can make a lot of difference to the company. But hiring them is not easy, so you have to be patient, and because when you hire the wrong person, it takes you lose 6 months to a year or more to undo it, right?
Yeah.
So Rajat, a kind of one of the last questions about Chef is, what's your vision as a CEO founder, right? Looking at Chef, where do you want Chef to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
I think I have a couple answers to this. I mean, I would love to get to the point where, there's thousands of Chef robots that are deployed all over the world making meals. I think that would be extremely exciting. And to be clear, nobody's done that. In robotics, nobody's really succeeded yet. And I think if we can be one of the early success stories, this kind of goes to point number 2. I would love for Chef to be the company that everyone looks to and be like, aha, success story. Let me do robotics too. Right now, the reality is the autonomous vehicles and stuff like that. People, one company was successful out of autonomous vehicles, Waymo. Everyone else basically was not successful. Waymo's immensely cool. It's magical in some regard. You see it around the city. It's magical, and it inspires people. I think Waymo really does inspire people, and I think ChatGPT inspires people too, right? I think there's these, like, Apple inspires people. Well, maybe not the latest software, but like, but generally, I think, there's these companies and products that really are inspiring, and I would love if Chef can be that company that inspires people to say, "Wow, robotics is possible." First of all, it is possible to build a great business. It's possible to have something that really adds good business value. I want to do robotics. And we get some of these people who follow the trend, whatever the trend might be at the time, whether it's crypto or now it's AI, and saying, I want to make robotics a trend. And we have this kind of collectively revolution in robotics, just like we're seeing in AI right now. I think that will be really inspiring. And I think hopefully we can play a part in that by showing success. I think success turns all tides, is the way I think about it.
Also very excited about the partnership, Rajat, and it's a pleasure working with you and with Ray, and getting to know some of the other senior folks like Liz and things like that. So it's been great working with you, and it's good to we look forward to an amazing, rewarding, winning journey, right? And as you said, the opportunity is just huge, especially the market you're going after. So. I really appreciate the time, Rajat, for sharing very openly kind of what has been your journey, your experiences, and where you're taking the company, and advice to, founders. So really appreciate the time and insights.
Thank you so much.
So Rajat, thank you so much. And we enjoyed the conversation. Hope you enjoyed it as well. And it was very valuable. Thank you so much.
Yep.